Go. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is a Zoom series that we're doing with Dave Wilkes, Heidi Fleming, this wonderful manager in Montreal with whom I used to work years ago, managing Penny Lang and a bunch of other people, Francois Bourassa as well, invited me to interview Dave Wilkes, who I found really, really interesting. I've read a lot about Dave. He's done a lot. And I think anybody that's a music aficionado like I am will be quite interested in what he has to say about the industry today too. So I just want to tell you how this is going to work. We're going to do 3 interviews. And in the first session, we're going to talk about how it all began, share some of Dave's anecdotes and what keeps him going. And then next week, we're going to do another session and talk about how Dave is involved in Canada and some of the artists up here. And in the third session, he's, and that's going to happen the week after next. Heidi will post some of these dates for you. We're going to discuss the industry today, and I'm going to ask Dave to share with you his kernels of wisdom, which I know he's garnered over the years, and suggestions and recommendations about anybody that wants to get into the business. So let's get started. Dave's been around for a long time, helping to mold the music business since his early days at the bitter end. And yeah, I'm reading from my notes because I want to get it right. And I was really happy when Heidi asked me to interview him because he's just such an interesting person. And we had a lot in common about just how the philosophy of the people that we worked with. So I'm just going to read like a really mini bio and then we'll get into it. So Dave Wilkes has been an integral figure in New York City's folk scene for 6 decades as manager of the bitter end, a music publisher of popular songs, and executive producer of many recordings, a manager and a co-manager of many artists such as Emmylou Harris, Jerry Jeff Walker, who wrote Mr. Bojangles, and my sisters and I still sing that around the house, Richie Havens, and Barry Manilow, Tom Paxton, Josh White Jr., Heather Pearson, and many, many more. He was also vice president of A&R for Vanguard Records, and he has a long history in record producing, which he'll also talk about, and a folk label, which helped launch the careers of many folk luminaries in the 50s and 60s. He's still an active manager, agent, and recorder of folk artists, but I'll let him talk to you about that as well, and a consultant for the Canadian folk music industry, which we're very interested in, and the US representative to the popular folk world music group, Sultans of String. So now I'm just going to let Dave talk. You've heard enough of me. So Dave, I'm just going to ask you some questions and I'm really not going to interrupt you a lot because it's just, I find it's very compelling just listening to you. So tell us how it began. Like you, I read about your love of folk music and your interviews with, you mentioned Pete Seeger. And just as an aside, I had my picture taken with Pete Seeger probably 25 years ago at this folk festival, and I recently posted it on Facebook. And you'd think that I had had my photo taken with God. I mean, I love the guy too. I mean, really, he was everybody's hero all over the world, not just in the States. So I'd like you to talk to me a bit about what your influence is, how you knew Pete, and when you were growing up, I want you to talk about the era in which you grew up, which really, you know, how you got the bug of folk music.
Right.
So tell us, Dave, how did it all begin? There you go.
All right. Well, you know, you gave me a good lead in with Pete Seeger, and he was one of the guys that influenced me the greatest without me even knowing who he was. So when I was a kid growing up in the Bronx, my parents were basically liberal, middle-class people who had a good background in culture. So there's always music playing in our house. It would be maybe Odetta or even before Odetta, classical music, Broadway music, jazz. So I'm always listening. Gospel, you know, Mahalia Jackson. So I just grew up with a very wide background of music, and I didn't really know there was a difference in genres. I just knew what I was hearing, and it was all great stuff. So I guess maybe without knowing it, I tuned my ear to listen and appreciate good music. Um, Being a kind of a liberal family, my parents were always interested in the civil rights movement before it was, before the 60s, before this is going back to the 40s.
Whoa, yeah.
So one of the places that they sent me when I was, I think, 6 or 7, I don't even know how old I was a camp called Camp Woodland in the Catskill Mountains in Phoenicia, New York. Now, of course, I didn't even know where Phoenicia was, and I didn't really know anything about it. Just that it was really a great place where a lot of very nice people, the counselors were great. And unbeknownst to me, and I didn't find this out until maybe 30 or 40 or 50 years later, that Eric Weisberg, the famous folk singer, um, a red diaper baby. I see that, right. I guess more like a pink one, but it's true. Um, so Eric Weisberg was one of my roommates, my bunkmates. And even years before that, John Harold of the Greenbrier Boys was another one of my roommates or bunkmates. I think we were, like I said, 7 years old, 8 years old, something like that. I can count backwards. So yeah, like 7 or 8 years old. And it was a wonderful place. And they had music. And one night around a fireplace or burning in the fields, they had this guy who was singing, to us, and banjo and guitar, interesting voice. And we all just kind of listened to him, and that was Pete Seeger. I didn't know who Pete Seeger was. And many years later, I was attending his festival in off the Hudson River in Sloop, I think. I think it was in Tarrytown, and he was there because I had known him through Vanguard Records and had a casual relationship with him. But I said, Pete, I don't know whether to blame you or to thank you for getting me in the you whetted my appetite for this kind of music,
Yeah,
Clearwater Festival. That's what it was.
yeah,
I see
yeah.
Heidi's a very good manager.
Yeah, she is. It's
So
actually good that she's chatting because when she can fill in some stuff.
no, that's great. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That's what I saw there.
great.
So that was my lead into interest in folk music, and I didn't really know it was folk music. And of course, I had the germ or the idea of civil rights. Obviously,
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a problem, especially I wasn't aware of what went on in this in this country. But
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Odetta before because we actually had Odetta in Montreal at the Golem Concert Room. It was Mike McDevitt. It was Michael Regan Street that
right.
had her there. And my best friends actually opened up the show we were all like, oh my God, it's Odetta. So it affected us too, even years later, because this was the 80s, but it was like just such an honor to have her.
So I'm going back to the early 60s, and when I was in college,
Yeah.
and listened to this music all the time. And I was in Bloomington, Illinois, and they had a couple of record stores downtown. I would walk from the fraternity house that I lived in and buy every record that came out, every new folk music record, and bring it back to the fraternity. We would play it, and then a couple of guys and myself would work out some arrangements on songs and sing them. Mostly, probably the Highwaymen and Kingston Trio, and that's that poppy sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. So from that point on, when I graduated college, I started to hang out in Greenwich Village, and I'd be there basically every night. And met a woman at a party. Her name was B. Marks, and she told me that she worked for Fred Weintraub, who owned the Bitter End. I think it was called the Cock and Bull at that time. It wasn't even the Bitter End.
Okay.
And she invited me to come down, and I just took it with a grain of salt and didn't go down there. But one night, after being at the Cafe Finjan, which was another kind of a world music place around the corner, I was walking by the club late at night. She happened to be on the phone, which was right next to the door. And she said, Dave, come on in. So I went in, and
Mhm.
she told me that they needed an MC, a host. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. It ended up they needed a doorman, and I said that's pretty good also. So I took that job. I think $7 a night, and had an importing and exporting company at the time.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a nice. It was just myself and a lawyer and my father. It was kind of a side business for them, and I was
yeah.
doing it all. But it wasn't exciting. It didn't fulfill my desire for culture.
Well, of course not.
But I did that, and then worked at the bitter end at night, and
Yeah.
then decided that I want to do the music scene, all the time. So I handed in my papers to my
No,
father.
that was a really good step. I mean, I just, you're talking about this, and when we were all little, we just thought, oh wow, the bitter end, what is that? Like New York City was such a huge thing for us. So like it's
Yeah,
really cool to be talking to somebody who actually, worked there, was the doorman, and really you met so
exactly.
many people. Like I see you worked with some really interesting people at the bitter end, and meeting them there, Jerry Jeff Walker, of course. I always go back to him because of the Mr.
Well, I get
Bojangles.
I get Jerry Jeff to work there. I met him
Oh,
through
wow.
Emmylou Harris, and I met Emmylou Harris through David Bromberg and Paul Siebel. So it's actually Jerry. Well, let me just step it back a while away. So I was in charge of the Hootenanny, which was the Tuesday night of every week. We had a kind of an amateur night there. It wasn't really an amateur. A lot of the guys were professionals.
Yeah.
Jay Leno used to come down to work his material, but nobody knew who he was. It's funny then. And Dave Bromberg came down and played there every Tuesday. So, I kind of got friendly with him. And he told me about this woman named Emmylou Harris. And she was singing a song called Mr. Bojangles. I don't know if I told you this last week or.
No, no, you didn't. You
All right.
didn't. So it's a
So
good
she
story
just
though.
she lived right around the corner on this, the bitter end was on Bleecker Street. And she lived, I believe, on LaGuardia Place or Thompson Street. And she lived with Paul Siebel. And then she told me about the song Mr. Bojangles, and that a guy named Jerry Jeff Walker wrote it, and Dave Bromberg knew him as well. So he introduced me to Jerry Jeff, and I became his manager as well. In those days, Mr. Bojangles was being played on WBAI, which was a very progressive public radio station. Bob Fass was the jock at late at night, and he was way ahead of everybody. He's still around. I don't know if he's still on WBAI. And he was playing Mr. Bojangles. Nobody else was playing it. Nobody else knew the song existed, which I found was ludicrous because you hear the song once and
Yeah.
your whole world. Well, you know what the song is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Jerry was in a group called Circus Maximus, who recorded for Vanguard Records. Of course, later on I ended up working for Vanguard, but Maynard Solomon, I guess, didn't think that song was good, or maybe he never heard it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody did anything about it. Jerry left Circus Maximus. I managed them, and I made the rounds to the record companies with the song.
Right.
So I took the song to John Hammond, and he thought it was wonderful, and he wanted to sign it. And I took the song to Jerry Wexler.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ahmed Erdogan and Jerry Greenberg, and he wanted to sign it. So at that time, I went back to Fred Weintraub in the management business and kind of like merged my company with his. Because Fred had a very successful management company with the Four Seasons and Neil Diamond, people like that, and it was pretty exciting to be involved with his company. So with his office and his lawyer, we made the deal for Jerry with Atlantic Records. Meanwhile, John Hammond loved the song so much, he recorded it with a piano cocktail singer named Bobby Cole. And he was going to put the record out first. And we told him he couldn't do that because Jerry had the first recording. It was his song. And so we had the right to hold it back for Jerry.
Right.
So when Jerry's record came out on Atco, which was a division of Atlantic. The first week it came out, and it went to like number 50 or 40 in the charts. Columbia, it was really Date Records, which was a division of Columbia, put out the Bobby Cole. I'm sure his name was Bobby, but it was definitely Cole. His rendition of Mr. Bojangles, and that went to, well, here's how it worked. Atlantic took a big ad, full page billboard ad on Mr. Bojangles, Jerry Jeff Walker. Boom, it went on the charts.
Mhm.
The next week, Columbia came out with their rendition and said Bobby Cole, the better, more popular version. They took a full page ad, and that went to number 47. The next week, Atlantic Records took out another full page. This is like the way you used to do it in the business, right?
Yeah.
And that went to number 30 or whatever, and just kept on bouncing up. So the two records were, I think, I don't know if either one of them got higher than top 15 or so, somewhere in that area. These are folk music, but this is the pop charts, top 100.
Right.
So Mr. Bojangles was on the charts twice at the same time, and that rest started. That was Jerry's history.
Right, right. Well, you were also Barry Manilow's first manager, and you worked with jazz people too, like Bella Fleck, who I adore, and Jerry Douglas. But
I didn't really work with Bella Fleck. I've done recordings with him.
Okay.
And I know him well probably through Jerry Douglas. But I hooked up Bela Fleck with Chris McCool of the Sultans of String, and Bela recorded.
Oh, well, that's good.
Through my, my urging. I mean, it wasn't much urging. Everybody knows Bela. I know what a great addition to the Sultans of Strings record.
Well, why don't you tell us a bit about, Barry Manilow, and also let's hear some anecdotes, because you told us some anecdotes last week that I thought were sort of cute, like just stories about your relationships with some of these people, and how it is to actually, be somebody's manager, and the warmth and the frustrations that come with all of that. But there's some really funny stories. I had so many funny stories with Penny, I can't tell you. The other one I wanted to ask you about was Townes Van Zandt. Apparently he spent time in New York. So I'm just wondering, did you ever hook up with him?
Yeah, well, Townes became a friend of Jerry Jeff, obviously, and Emmy.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, even though I don't think he lived in New York. He was always from like a Texas guy, right?
Okay, yeah.
And Townes, and he's an amazing songwriter, great artist. I want to get back to Emmy though, because Emmy Harris was right around the corner living with Paul. So I made a recording with her, and we had Paul Siebel and Dave Bromberg and Gary White, who was the bass player and wrote long time that Linda Ronstadt had a gigantic hit.
Oh yes, that's my favorite.
And also Eric Weisberg, who I mentioned was a camp bunkmate of mine, but we didn't know that at that time either. It came out, later than that. So I was also managing a guy named Gamble Rogers, who was with the Serendipity Singers, which the bitter end also managed. And RCA was interested in him, and they gave me studio time to bring him in to do a demo. And I brought along Emmylou Harris as well, and did a demo with Emmy.
Wow.
They passed on both of them. It's just like,
Imagine.
Yeah, and then I took Emmy to Vanguard Records, who, and they said, well, we already have Joan Baez. It's like, you can't have two.
Did you have two?
And took it to Elektra Records, and they probably, I don't know if they said to me that they have Judy Collins, but they didn't, I can't figure out I can't figure out how the industry can say that they, develop acts. It's a transom with them. Like, things come in, maybe they spend time thinking about it, maybe they don't. They don't really analyze each artist and think, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
Somebody wise said to me, how can you have too many Joan Baez type folk singers or females,
Yeah.
And they're different, Emmy is completely different than Joan, and Judy is different than all three of them. and each one has a great place. So you never can have too many great artists. You know, what a
Well, no, it's like you said, you can't have too many
no.
great artists. A great artist is a great artist.
So I went everywhere with Emmy. Meanwhile, I was booking her, and I booked her on the coffee house circuit. And I'll tell you one of the disappointments in a minute. Just remind me about that. But
Sure.
I know that Emmy always felt bad after the fact that I didn't go on the tour with her. You know,
Mhm.
this is way before Graham Parsons. This is
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
19. I signed Emmy in 1968. You know, and I was working with her before I even signed it. So this would be probably 67. And I didn't realize how shy she was. You know, I mean, I would never go on stage and sing a song. I couldn't even walk in the bitter end stage when we had a fire and tell everybody to leave because I had stage fright.
Yeah, I know. I hear you.
But she, you know, and so she always felt that I should have been there. And she had to go get off a plane in Albany, I think it was, and not not know where she was going because somebody picked her up. But that's another story altogether. So I made yeah. Well, I mean, she would like somebody to be her tour manager probably, but
Yeah.
the coffee house circuit used to pay $75 for 3 days of performance at a university. Plus, they'd give you room and board, so you would have
Right.
no expenses. Then you'd have a day travel, and then another school that was in that circuit. Let's say Albany, and then maybe the next day travel to RPI, which is in Troy, so you can almost walk there. And then another $75, and then every member that you had in the group was wasn't another 75, but it was somewhat less, and also room and board. So a group in 1962, 63, 60, well, it was later than 62, 65, or 66, they could stay alive. You know,
Right.
they would work 5 or 6 or 7 weeks in a row. They would probably do like 14 colleges, build up a real following. Didn't have room, didn't have board. They'd get a gas allotment or a travel allotment from one university to the other. So, by the way, this Canadian company that emulated my idea, you know, and they're still in business right now, and that's Roots.
Oh,
And I'm trying to think of my friend who started that. He recently passed. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank, but you guys know who he is. He has a
well,
son.
Heidi should know. Heidi.
Nathan.
She has to think. She has to think.
The son is. It has to do with gamble with Stan Rogers and
Oh, okay.
anyway. So I made a deal with Emmylou Harris with Jubilee Records. Right, exactly. That's the guy. Yeah. And with Jubilee Records and Mickey Eichner, who later became the head of VP for Columbia Records. It was a lovely record recorded with all the guys that Emmy liked and grew up with. As I mentioned, Bromberg and Paul Siebel and Eric Weisberg and Gary. And in the midst of now, this is good. This I shouldn't even be talking about this, but what the hell? Let's make this interesting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In the midst of our recording, Emmy Emmy got a boyfriend who she didn't later marry, who decided he wanted to be the manager,
Okay.
and he got a big agent at I think William Morris named Shelley Schultz, who I'm friendly with even now. And as a matter of fact, we just Facebooked each other. And he wanted to bring in a producer who was the arranger for the Leon Bibb television show. I hope it's Leon Bibb. And so it's kind of basically like a cocktail sort of a guy, you know, very poppy strings and boom. And I knew it was terrible, terrible idea.
Mhm.
And I was working for MCA Music at the time. But to step back again, the reason I was working at MCA Music is I arranged for Fred Weintraub's publishing companies to be sold in partnership with MCA Music, which is also Universal Films and Universal Records. That became a big deal. Fred made it a deal with Neil Diamond to go to leave Bang Records and to go to MCA Universal Records.
Right.
So Emmy wanted a release from a contract, and I knew it was a bad deal, and I resisted for almost a year. And then after that, how can you keep an artist who you're really attracted to under contract if she doesn't want to do it?
Yeah.
So I gave her a release. Shelly Schultz and Tom, her boyfriend, became her manager. And they did some cockamamie cocktail album. One of the songs was Rainbows. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, which is a great song.
Mhm.
But it wasn't really what Emmy, wanted.
Yeah.
Slick, and she didn't want to do it. So that record's still around, but she was never happy with that. So that was one of the few disappointments in my career, just not really continuing my relationship with her. And I
Yeah.
have actually, yeah, it was because I thought she was wonderful, and I got national television, syndicated TV for it, television commercials, had her working as much as she wanted to. We were off to a real great start for basically a brand new artist.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's it, eh? It's like everybody has their story.
yeah, but in my last commission check, I bought a beautiful piece of antique furniture.
Well, that's good. You got something out of it.
That's increased in value by about 20 times, but still, it's no, nothing. That's not what I wanted. I didn't get into this business to be an antique dealer.
No, you can't win them all, right? So
Anyway, Emmy Lou decided that she wanted, after I think being disappointed with the spring deal, with the Jubilee deal, she decided to take a couple of years off. Went back to Virginia to live with her parents, had a back operation,
yeah.
and then she started to do singing in Washington, D.C. area. And I believe she met Graham there.
Okay.
And, and then started to be noticed again. Mary Martin, who worked for Warner Brothers, offered her a deal. And she took it, and she ended up in Nashville and becoming, a very, very important artist.
All right. Yeah. Well, you've worked with other important artists too. So I want to hear about some of the artists that you've worked with, what it was really like being an artist manager for you.
Well,
and I just saw somebody walk into a room behind you.
My wife probably.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, because all of this has an effect on us too, like when we're working with artists, how it affects our families as well, So when you have a good artist like Heidi's been with Francois Bourassa for a long, long time. And when we had Penny, they you know what I mean? They sort of become part of your family. So I imagine when you were at the bitter end, that was a while back, and you went on for years with people like Emmy Lou Harris.
Hold on. Listen, my dog is barking. Let me shut the door. Hold on.
Okay, no worries. Something like that was bound to happen. It always happens in Zoom.
No, it's great. It's part of life.
Yeah.
So I went to a school in Bloomington, Illinois called Illinois Wesleyan University.
Right.
And they had one of the best music schools in the country. Of course, I didn't take advantage of any of that because I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Right. And there was a young lady who was in the drama area, and I bumped into her in New York. The school had a choir, and they traveled to Columbia University. So I went up to see them, and I met this woman who had gone to college with me a few years younger, and I said she was a drama and a singer, and we started to date. And then she told me that she was singing with this arranger band leader named Barry Manilow, because nobody knew who Barry was.
Okay. So
I went to pick her up, and I met Barry. They were living in Brooklyn, and then I started to listen to his music. He was the music director for The Drunkard, which was on 13th Street in the West Village, which was kind of like a little operetta musical comedy. And he's telling me how he composed music and how he's arranged. And he was a very bright guy. I liked him. And he had this woman named Jeannie Lucas, who was, I wouldn't say that she was the spit image of Bette Midler because she came first. So Bette Midler was the spit image of Jeannie Lucas.
Okay.
And I booked them mostly in the New York area, and people that saw them loved them. She was with Bette's side, so that's what Jeannie and Barry was amazing on, arrangement, piano. And then Jeannie decided that she didn't want to go on the road. I had a bunch of dates for them, I think, in the Chicago area, and she wanted to get married. And so that, kind of slowed that down. And Barry wanted to go back to being, I never understood this, but he knew what he was doing, a page at CBS. So I gave him a release.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I know, he calls me up and says, that he's playing at the downstairs upstairs with Bette Midler, and do I want to come? I was at Vanguard Records at the time, and so I went down there up there to see to see Bette and Barry, and that was the day that Ahmet Ertegun was there and signed Bette. So,
Yeah.
So that, because that was the deal for Bette, but Barry was really the big time at it, and then. Later on, I think he signed with Bell Records as an artist himself.
Right.
And he called me up. I was at Vanguard Records, and he wanted to see me. So he came down. My wife, Leslie, and I took him out for lunch. And he told me that Larry Utall had sold the company and Clive Davis had taken it over. And that Clive just thought that that Barry was a cocktail singer. And Barry was depressed, and I don't even know if Barry's mother was with us for that lunch or what. But so that's when I went to see him up at the duplex with Ben. But it worked out because a guy named Bob Esposito came along with a song called Brandy or Mandy.
Mandy.
Well, it was Brandy at first.
Oh, okay.
Clive changed the name from Brandy to Mandy because I think there was another song, maybe the Tony Orlando song, with those Brandy, you're fine, So, and that was Barry's gigantic hit, first one, I think.
Well,
And
my favorite was Weekend in New England. And right, I was 17 when I heard Weekend in New England. I was with my first boyfriend, and everybody was, as you know, Barry, when you're talking about him being a lounge singer kind of thing, it's like, it sort of wasn't really cool to like Barry Manilow, but I loved him.
And everybody did. And everybody knew that it wasn't that cool, and they didn't care, right? They just,
yeah.
I just saw this Clive Davis special on Netflix.
I have to jump in. It's kind of like ABBA.
Oh, no. Okay.
Right.
We're not going to go there. We're not going to go there.
No, it's true. So I saw this Netflix thing on Clive Davis, and I believe that Barry was interviewed. I know that Barry didn't write the song "I Write the Songs."
Oh yeah. Yeah,
because he was a songwriter, right? He is a songwriter.
Right.
I don't even, and I thought that he said on the Netflix show that he didn't even write Weekend in New England or whatever. I have to look at the credits. We should Google the credits and see who actually is the writer. But
Clive, well, I'll do that for the next one.
All right.
Yeah, because it's going to take a while.
All right. Yeah. No. True.
Yeah, but
but we heard he wrote the commercial for McDonald's.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
He wrote a lot of the songs, but the ones that everybody thinks, including the song "I Write the Songs," I don't think he wrote.
He didn't write them.
Well, we'll have to look over between now and the next one. We'll have to look and see.
Yeah. I'll do that this week. I'll check it out.
So getting back to I just jumped from Emmy to Barry, but so Paul Siebel was living with Emmy, and I got to know him, and I managed him as well, and made a deal with him for Elektra Records. And that became, well, Louise was one of them, Bride 45.
Mhm.
Just an amazing album. That's probably my wife and my favorite album to listen to. And yeah, Paul was really great.
Yeah.
So I signed him to MCA Music where I was working at that time, and then did demos with him and took him over to Elektra. And Peter Siegel, who was the A&R guy over there, signed him. So,
But what I find interesting, Dave, about what you've done is, I mean, you've done it, you know, you've gone from like doorman to manager to record producer
did the
to
publisher,
the publishing, recording, and it's like, it's what I like about it. The reason that I wanted to call this first video Falling Into, you know, that's how a lot of people get. I mean, I fell into music too. I never thought I'd work in the music industry, but it's like you seem to have fallen into everything. You didn't have a game plan and it's worked for you. And I like that. I like it. It's serendipitous.
So
We have 2 minutes left. Okay, so we're gonna have to wrap this up, but because we got 2 minutes.
I'm just getting going here.
I know. So we got next week, and we got a lot of stuff coming up next week because we're going to talk about Canadian artists. We're going to talk about Penny. I mean, what I just want to sum up is I was just very happy to hear about Emmy Lou. I mean, I've always loved her, and Barry Manilow too. Plus, I mean, I'm, you know, I just think the fact that Mr. Bojangles and Jerry Jeff Walker, I mean, all of these people that you worked with, the thing that I love about folk music is that it's family. It feels like family. And you seem to have walked through every space with these people, like from being the manager
Just
to
jump
making
before we
records.
hang up.
Yeah.
All the acts that I spoke to you about were a 4-block radius.
Ah, see, there you go.
Bitter end, yeah.
Proximity, it's the best.
Yeah, and they all knew each other and they all supported each other.
Yeah, Heidi, your comment, we're talking about Penny next week. There's 3 different sessions, as I said in the beginning, so we're going to talk about Penny then.
All right.
But Dave, like, I really want to thank you. I mean, this is really interesting. We're going to post this week
All right, great.
on people's different sites, on Facebook, etc. And next week, it's going to be great to talk about your Canadian implications. And maybe we'll get a few last comments from Heidi that keeps throwing us off. But this has been great. And I want to thank Heidi too. I mean, this is what it's about. It's about.
Thanks so much, Dave. Great mentor for me over the years. Thank you. And love to hear your stories, but I don't think 3 hours is going to be enough. 3 times 40.
So
well, we'll see. We'll